Hey everyone, it's time to kick off another exciting session of our DevOps office hours. It's August 2nd, 2023. My name's Eric Osterman and I'll be your host. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. Cloud Posse helps teams conquer AWS using our rock solid blueprints for Terraform. Whether you're starting from scratch or just not satisfied with your current setup, book a session with me by going to cloudposse.com/quiz. Again, cloudposse.com/quiz. and answer a few quick questions. We'll have a call to show you exactly how your team will succeed. For those of you new to the call, the format is very informal. My goal is to get your questions answered. If you're curious about Cloud Posse or any of our open source tools and Terraform modules, this is a great place to ask. For those of you joining through our podcast or YouTube channel, we host these calls every week, so don't miss out. You can register for these live and interactive sessions by going to cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, cloudposse.com/office hours. Our call today is recorded. We'll post a recording of this session to our YouTube channel. So if you want to help support what we do over here, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. It helps us out a great deal. Just head over to youtube.com/cloudposse. Again, youtube.com/cloudposse. And don't forget, you can share these videos with your team if you find something interesting on our call today. The best place is to go over to YouTube, find the video, you can share that at the specific point that you found interesting. So with that said, let's dive into the announcements. One of those announcements was something uncovered by wiz.io, which is one of the many security and compliance SaaS platforms out there. They uncovered a way to exfiltrate or get some sensitive data out from the underlying VM, provided it's running on, was it the AMD Zenbleed Zenbleed processors. Are they actually called Zenbleed? That doesn't seem like the name of the processor. I thought that was just the name.
No, it's called the Zen 2 processor.
Okay, I think yeah, that was probably a typo there. All right. So not good. And they estimate that 60% of the workloads running on the AMD Zen 2 processors are vulnerable. That's an estimation by Wiz and not by AWS. Similarly, I haven't seen any specific AWS acknowledgement or response to it unless there was a link in it here. All right. Small minor announcement. Not that exciting, to be honest, but Route 53 added support for 4 more TLDs. It's not that exciting because, I don't know, none of these TLDs stood out to me really as something, dang, I was hoping I could register that on Route 53. What is they offload all the Route 53 registrar to, who is it? Anyone remember?
I think they use multiple registrars. I think they use Gandhi as well as a few other ones. So it's not just one.
Oh, I thought it was just Gandhi.
Someone had pointed out in the terms of service, you actually end up going through one or more of their partners.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Eric, before you jump to the next one, I'm just going to post quickly in the link there. Amazon did respond to that and say that they've patched everything with Zenbleed at this point.
Okay, cool. Thanks for the closure on that.
I assume those instances that they're listed are the only ones that actually use those processors. Otherwise, they would mention it some other way. Oh yeah, no action is required from customers using these instance types. So yeah.
So yeah, if you were using Nitro instances, which are recommended anyways, this was not a concern. So that's good. It is a default recommendation that we have. At Cloud Posse, we also deploy SCPs to ensure that by default, customers only deploy Nitro class instances. So that might be a good justification. All right, somebody shared this in the office hours channel. I haven't had a chance to dive into it personally. I guess there was some sort of a WAF bypass, injecting some invalid JSON object, which prompts the question from the person who posted it: how mature is AWS WAF? And, you know, is this a red flag? Anyone have comments on that? My opinion is AWS WAF feels like Apache mod security as a SaaS, pretty primitive compared to maybe some of the other options by Cloudflare, but and others. Someone else, Jenkins, I think you shared this one. Replit, I'm not familiar with this. Is this like deploy HQ, or what is Replit? And now it supports Terraform deployments.
You can hear me now. I was having mic issues, but yeah, I'm not familiar with deploy HQ, but Replit is just it's like a Python, or actually multi-language in browser development environment. And now you can like develop there and host your, small apps, that type of thing. I just thought it was cool that they added deployment and hosting to the service, just like kind of an all-in-one type package.
Who do they target predominantly?
I would say like hobby devs, maybe not like enterprises, maybe small businesses, but I look at it as like a hackathon type development where you just need an environment, put something together to try something out. And I mean, if it works, then you could just host it right there as opposed to going to Heroku or, I don't know, Netlify, other providers that are kind of in that same space.
Yeah, I could get that. I could see the use case for that as a hobbyist, not having to manage that, assuming the pricing is right.
Yeah, I don't know all that much about them, but they popped up on my radar a while ago because they have their own AI that's a co-pilot, like alternative or whatever. I think it's called Ghostwriter. I think that's the name of it. And they also have some tool, I think, that allows you to import all your infrastructure from Heroku and like stand it up on their on their infrastructure as well. So
that's smart. All right.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. And I think you had, you shared, I think you shared two other links. One was related to a demo for a system initiative, which is nice. I know we'd announced system initiative before, but didn't really have too much information on it. And my understanding is it's also very early, like you can only configure basic resource types with it. But if anyone is curious about system initiative and what they're trying to achieve, it seemed like a good demo. Michael, anything you'd like to add to that?
No, nothing more. And yeah, I must have missed the earlier mention. I'm picking this up from podcasts, and my podcast feed is like 2 months behind. So
that's all right. Actually, I find that beneficial because there's, a lot of us, we miss things on the first, second, or third announcement. There's no harm in resharing things even again, because people don't always get the bleeding edge of news. And then there's this Terraform writer. I don't know if I was trying it out just before the call, but I think I must have closed the tab. I wanted to see if it could generate a good example. Yeah, here. Let's see what it came up with. So here, generate a Terraform module that provisions managed Prometheus and Grafana together. So let's see how that looks. Looks like it needs some parameterization, if you ask me. Oops. And where's the rest of my module? Yeah, that didn't work. And this is the big problem I've seen with ChatGPT-ish things, is that they get truncated quite frequently these days.
Yeah, I think for that one, it's the size of the payload is limited to the free version to like 15 KB. If you go to the pricing page on this one, you'll see some of the limits of the tool there. But yeah, they only give you so much stuff, and then like for ChatGPT, you would say continue or something like that, and it'll give you the rest of the payload. For
Yeah.
this one, they're cutting you off pretty quickly. The cool thing that I thought of with this particular one, I shared a link to the Terraform writer, but there's also a CICD writer that has like tons of tools to develop pipelines. If you click that GitHub Actions pull down, you'll see all the other tools that it supports. So if you have an idea for like a pipeline and you want to carry it to another service, you might be able to whip it out pretty quickly, just to get it up and running.
Yeah. I think it would be nice if this was not just a little single line text entry for anything more advanced. Probably would want that, but it's interesting what they're doing here. My guess is they're basically coming up with some well-defined prompts and more or less just feeding your input plus their prompt into GPT.
Yeah, that would be my guess. Like it's a model that's specifically trained for that type of content creation.
Yeah, that we'll start seeing a lot more of that. All right. And those three. Then yeah, just something, I guess in the very recent version of Docker Compose from earlier in July, version 2.20, they have come out with imports, or includes, I think they call them. Yeah. So now you can include other Docker Compose files, and they get deep merged in your configuration. So if you're familiar with Docker Compose and your files have become unmanageable, or you'd like to be more intelligent about how you combine them, then using includes is the way to go. And if you like the way that Docker Compose works for general Docker containers, you might like also Atmos, which is the tool by Cloud Posse, and we support the same kind of concepts. So our stacks have imports, and you can import your configurations, and you can think about an Atmos stack configuration as more or less a Docker Compose file. It's very similar. It's a opinionated YAML schema where you define your Terraform projects, just like in Docker Compose. And then you pass your variables to those projects, just like in Docker Compose. And because it's all YAML, it's very easy to use a library like mergo to merge it all together. And that's what we do with Atmos. And on another note, another article, I didn't get to announce it last week because we had a special guest speaker. But I thought it was an interesting article that gave me some thought. Also mentions Winglang, which has been on Office Hours and System Initiative, which we also discussed or re-announced today. But what we're seeing is somewhat of a rebirth of how to think about infrastructure as code, or what are we trying to solve. Going back to 10 years ago, using libraries like Fog, was it? I forget, for Ruby was one of the popular ways to define your infrastructure in a semi-declarative way. Lots of different projects were born around that time, but so was Terraform. And we all know how that ended up, and Terraform ended up becoming one of the more mainstream projects. So Terraform was great. It made infrastructure as code accessible to everyone, kind of like WordPress and PHP for end users who wanted a blog. But you push the limits of that. And now 8+ years later, it's gotten very complex to manage large projects with tools like Terraform, and we create abstractions on top of it. So one of the nice things that I got out of this article was some analogs to HTML. And today, the way a lot of companies approach infrastructure as code is strictly at the HTML level, writing more and more complicated HTML to achieve the outcome you want on the website. And guess what? You want to change the look and feel of your website in HTML, you got to totally refactor the freaking HTML. Versus what we do in modern times is you use CSS. So if you have well-structured infrastructure as code, you can use, like HTML, you can use CSS to change the look and feel. What if you had well-structured infrastructure so that changing the architecture, changing the configuration of it was just CSS? Something like that or akin to that. Well, again, this is the argument for how Cloud Posse approaches infrastructure is you write your infrastructure as code, you write your Terraform in a certain way, that's vanilla Terraform, but you define your architecture and your configuration in the YAML, which is basically styling and decorating your infrastructure. And you can come up with countless infrastructures without changing your HTML, without changing your Terraform code. You can use the same exact Terraform code. So that's why this article resonated with me. Have a look over it. Maybe it will influence some of your architectural decisions and how you write Terraform code or pursue infrastructure. Now, other companies that they talk about here are taking, quite well, at a minimum, Winglang is taking, a radical approach, kind of melding a high-level language like Node.js or Python or something like that, and taking something like Terraform, sticking into a single language that can do everything. But I think that's it's a bold initiative, but it's a brand new language. It is not built on Node.js or the language of your choice. And one of the big complaints with Terraform, right, is, I got to learn a new language, even though you'll learn it in an afternoon. It's that easy. But here is like a full-fledged language like Golang or TypeScript that you got to learn in addition to also doing your infrastructure. But you get the magic of it being infrastructure aware out of the box. So it can provision the underlying resources for the underlying cloud based on your application architecture, and you don't need to know that because it's aware of it. Pretty lofty goal and ambition. I applaud people who think that big.
I kind of think Winglang seems a lot like Pulumi to me, like, but it's not doing it in just purely native, like, insert language of choice here. It's like a DSL. It's like Pulumi with a specific DSL is kind of the way I look at it there.
Yeah, if Pulumi came out with their own programming language, that is
I don't think it's not quite a language. I don't think it's like a Turing complete language. I think it's more DSL that actually runs on top of the node runtime. You
think that is what Winglang is?
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Because that's not how it was introduced to me when I spoke with them, but maybe they didn't, maybe they were talking about their future desired state instead of the current state. But my understanding is that's not how it is. But it would make a lot more sense to me, Matt, if it was like you described it.
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting. I didn't realize the guy that started Wing is the guy who started the AWS CDK.
Yep, I forgot to mention that point.
Yeah.
All right. So there's that link. Anyone else have some announcements, interesting news, things that caught their eye this week that we didn't announce yet? I didn't see really that much interesting from AWS.
There was one from Tom in the chat.
Let's see here. All right. AWS, public IPv4 address change plus public IP insights. So Tom, can you summarize this?
Yeah, so AWS is going to start from February next year charging for public IPs when they're in use, which currently day-to-day they only charge if they're not in use. So I think it's like $0.005 an hour per an IP. For example, an IP on load balancer is now going to cost, whereas currently it doesn't.
Alex Atkinson says they're going to make billions from this. Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, they've been willy-nilly about this for a long time. Just like, hey, you get an IP, you get an IP. If you launch public instances, they always get an IP, even though you don't use it, maybe. So now you got to be protective. I wonder do they talk about how this is going to be rolled out for the people with, for the millions of instances out there that probably have public IPs that are suddenly going to start racking.
Yeah, they give you between now and February 1st to get rid of that.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's basically their thing.
The pricing's not too unreasonable though. I think a lot of the smaller colos charge about $2 an IP. So they're charging, I think, a little under $4.
Yeah. What is per month? It works out to what per month? $2?
I think it's $3.75 if I did the math right. It kind of sucks if you already paid the Elastic IP fee though, because I think that's on top of the Elastic IP fee. So your Elastic IPs would go up, I imagine, another $3 to $4, $3.75.
Yeah, it's $3.65 a month per IP.
Oh, 65. Sorry.
Yeah, it's pretty. I mean, it's pretty expensive when you. I don't quite understand the whole thing though. Like if you have, I don't know, if you have a lot of IP addresses in use with AWS, like this could get expensive pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I believe in the article they mentioned, or maybe not this one, but I believe they mentioned that they're not going to charge if you bring your own IPs. So if you have your own block, you're still set on that.
Yeah, but that's pretty, I think this is all due to IPv4 scarcity right now. So if you go to IANA and try to get your own IPv4 block right now, good luck. You can only get it from like someone who has a big block that can basically carve it off and allocate it to you from their bigger pool, which is what AWS is doing right now. But forever, you could only get your own block if you could justify at least needing a /24. So at least needing like 255 public IP addresses. And you have to provide justification for that and pay the yearly fee for it and all of those kinds of things. So it's bringing your own IP isn't all that easy either. I think this is like a further boost to try to push people to use IPv6, in my opinion. That's why they're doing this.
Yeah, I think they touched on that either in this article or another one. I do remember reading about that. Is anyone here running IPv6 like on their VPC, like full, and then just doing IPv4 or using like Cloudflare, I guess, for the IPv4 or IPv6 connectivity into their like load balancer or whatever? Or I guess, is anyone here using IPv6?
We've done an implementation or two with it, but it's never gone too far. I think we talked about it on other office hours, and I feel like it's a cheapish or sheepish response to say, but the fact is there's so much to learn about doing IPv6 securely that you can really expose resources inadvertently that the risk might not be ready. So I mean, with that in mind, TLDR is like, except for a very, very, very small explicit range on the loopback addresses, like all IPv6 addresses are routable. So there's like what people thought, NAT and having private and non-routable IP addresses, and what the internet has done by preventing, the RFC, whatever it is, 17, 18 IP addresses from being routed all throughout the internet backbone, and all that kind of stuff was kind of a hack, so that they had this thing that was never really designed from the get-go. And
IPv6 gets rid of all that. So like if you have an IP address, it can be reached anywhere from anyone that's running IPv6, but for if you have like a firewall or some other, some other packet filtering thing in between. But, the NAT is no longer a quote unquote security or routing boundary anymore. So I think that throws a lot of people for a loop with IPv6 and they don't quite understand that. And that gets people in trouble.
Yeah. Alex shared a tweet. I pulled it up, and I guess the revenue estimate is $2.15 billion a year extra for AWS.
Yeah, really? Which link? Let me see here.
The Twitter one.
Oh, the Twitter one.
What's Twitter? I never heard of it. You mean X?
You mean X, right?
Sorry, X, my mistake.
That math is actually a little bit conservative because 365-day year is more than $43. He just rounded down. So and some years have an extra day in there.
Yeah. And as Hans points out, they've just come out with IPv4 as a service.
Yeah, I think the only thing I will say here is that this is based on looking at the entire allocation of the IPs that have been allocated to AWS as the starting point. And clearly they have a ton that are issued to their backbone and all of their non-customer infrastructure, as well as a bunch of world governments and things like that run on AWS. So I don't think it's going to be quite this, but it's certainly going to be a lot of money for them. I agree with that part.
And I wonder, for relatively little effort, to create a $1 billion revenue stream, potentially.
Wow.
All right. Cool. And let's see, any other announcements here? Fastly, what's the Fastly one? Announcing unified origin observability across Fastly delivery, compute, and security services. Alex, you want to introduce this one?
Yeah, sure thing. This is just an introduction of a feature that lets you look at metrics at a per origin granularity. Say, for example, you have a service for Nike.com. You might leverage 3 origins in the back end for GraphQL and static assets and whatever. Now you can get per origin metrics off it. It's something I've asked for even before they had compute at the edge as a feature. So I'm pretty excited about it.
And do they expose this through like open telemetry, or how do you get this into something where you can operate on it?
Yeah, I need to look at that more, but you can always, in the past when I've used Fastly, I exported all of their telemetry into, Datadog or whatever aggregation service you want.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
They do have some okay dashboards built in, but you can do more with Datadog, obviously.
I really like the trend that we're starting to see with more mature SaaS offerings exposing raw telemetry data, so you can start to import that into your Datadogs and CloudWatches and Prometheus and so forth. Spacelift doing that, GitHub Actions is doing that, and others.
Oh, it's really cool. It just lets you wire things up in new and different ways. Yeah. I'm all about raw telemetry.
Very cool. Let's see, what else do we have here?
I had something just to kind of quickly bring up about, it reminded me when you were talking about the new TLDs that you could register on Amazon. One of the things, I have a friend who has a domain in .gg, which I know like a lot of Twitch people use and a bunch of other companies there. And he had a situation recently where the .gg registrar decided that they didn't want anyone who had their who had their domains registered to a PO box to be able to have something running without verifying some other thing. And he never got the email on it. So they literally just took his domain offline until they could like verify what was going on, and to get in touch with them was like really, really hard. And what it brought to light to me, and just kind of reiterate, I always sort of knew it, but never like knew it at the, right at the front of my consciousness, is a lot of these alternate domains are run by like these third world like nations as a money, as a money making operation, and they don't have any one that they sort of owe loyalty to other than themselves. So like as an example, the biggest one is like, like .io is actually the British Indian owned territories or something like that. So there's a governmental agency that basically runs that. And if they decide to change a policy tomorrow, all these domains that run on .io could easily be affected and not, with no repercussions, and they haven't done anything wrong because they make their own rules in their own sandbox. So just more and more it leads me to say like get .com domain names wherever you can, because that's the only one, .com or .net or whatever are the only ones that are really, really regulated by IANA at the highest levels, so.
Which makes me think of this other thing I thought you were going to say instead of IO, because I know about IO, and that actually IO was also hacked a number of years ago. And there's been multiple incidents with .io, as cool of a domain at TLD as it is. But this one here, I haven't independently validated it, but I saw it on Hacker News, which was the Mali government takes back the ML domain. I haven't looked into why. My guess is that they wanted to cash in on the whole AI ML trend. Say, hey, we want to sell these for more now.
Yeah, probably. But again, they can do that because they don't, there is no governing body over this, because they make their own rules as a, as a third party, whatever it is, authority, TLD authority. So I hadn't even heard about this one, but I only know the one about .gg changing something to do with postal, not being able to register postal mailboxes and as a physical address, and they literally just took a bunch of people's domains offline while they squared that away.
I also want to throw out, when you look at all of these new fancy looking domains, just be really careful, because their SOA has to be up. When you've got, and I've had experiences with smaller CCTLDs like EG, where they just don't have the level of infrastructure like operations available to run that thing with 100% uptime. So if they have problems in their server that's running out of a back of a Shell gas station, like your site's going to go down. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
Another thing to add on the .com TLD, I was looking into setting up DNSSEC for some of the domains that we own on my team, and came across some information that highlighted the different outages for DNSSEC by TLD. So like root level servers having their own DNSSEC outages, and that also varies from TLD to TLD.
Yeah.
Is that a public root?
I think it just
SEC, SEC, DNSSEC.
I just linked it. I'm pretty sure that's the article.
Oh yeah.
I'm not sure when DNSSEC became a thing exactly, but it looks like there were some as recent as 2023. .ve Venezuela, which or .nz, haven't fact checked this, but it seems like a credible website.
Plain text, it's got to be.
It has SSL.
Yeah. Great. Let's see here. Vlad, I saw you joined a little late here. Did you have any announcements before we move into Q&A? All right. Let's do Q&A. This is just one I picked from the Slack, but that's a filler. Anybody else have some questions and we can answer?
I do have a question. I want to find out, we had an incident earlier, and I was just curious, how do people use readiness and liveness probes in K8s? This is related to databases and external dependencies. I'm just curious what best practices such that an external dependency like a database that is attached to your microservice, if that external dependency goes down, it doesn't lead to a series of cascading failures. Does the question make sense?
Yeah.
Yep.
So should you
I
check
can-
your dependency in your readiness or liveness probe, your external dependency, or should you do it some other way?
I've had a fair amount of experience doing this when developing applications, and my preference has always been that the application on startup and or the health check endpoint for the application verifies that all of its downstream dependencies are running, and if they're not, it basically fails and shows you that a reason why, like database server offline, Redis cache offline, or whatever it is on those things. And then that way you don't end up necessarily chasing your tail. It's usually really easy to see why you have outages, because the first thing you're going to do is go look at your app logs, and then you see all of your app servers failing and saying like, my database server is offline, and then you're like, oh, let me go look at database server. Although it does then cause all of your pods to fail eventually, but that is what you want, right? Especially if you have other logic that serves like some sort of static site in the case that your application is not available, or those types of things. Like we're having issues type of pages. But that's my 2 cents on it. I've done a lot of this in the past, and that's been the best way to handle it, in my opinion.
Some counter arguments, I don't disagree with what Matt said. I think in an ideal world, maybe that's, okay, let me describe ideal world, and then let me describe next step down. So I think in an ideal world, there's logic in your apps for how you gracefully degrade, and therefore your services, if they can still operate in some capacity and provide other services, well, then they should just continue to be online. But those endpoints have degrade gracefully, and the applications that call those endpoints are engineered to handle those failure situations. What happens when two things can happen when you take the more extreme case where the service itself is doing the health checks. If you're a microservices organization, you have lots of different microservices with lots of different pods. All of them are doing their own health checks. You are creating a lot of load on the upstreams just by the number of pods online performing their health checks. And as the number of pods you have come online, it is a larger and larger attack on your upstream resources if those checks that you are performing are not ultra lightweight. The other consideration is the longer your application has been online, the more different people have been working on it, the more generations of engineers that you have, the more of these microservices that you have. What ends up happening is you have these kind of cycles that end up coming into your application where microservice A depends on B, which depends on C, which depends on A. And it's not always totally obvious by everyone there. You have one of these situations where B goes down, then A goes down, and then C goes down because A went down. And now you have a full site blackout just because one service was unstable. And it can lead to a pretty brittle system if you have just even intermittent failures of your upstream. So I've suggested instead that your health check not check the upstreams, but it, respond with your own application error code if something else isn't working that it depends on and it's unable
Yeah.
to request.
I think one thing that I'll mention in all of the things, this should not be the only thing you're using. Using exponential backoffs and circuit breaker patterns are the other things that you should be using, so that you aren't overwhelming upstreams in those types of scenarios. So you fail to close, and then you do a backoff, you have a half open connection, you check, and then if it fails again, you close again and do another backoff, and keep doing that until you get to some sort of a period of time where you get into a recovery scenario. So just blindly only doing checks is a bad idea. I agree with that. But doing it in conjunction with really good microservices failure patterns is actually very workable from my experience in some very, very large microservices organizations I've worked in. We've done it this way. Like I'm talking, into the hundreds or thousands of microservices that are talking to each other.
Good feedback. Anyone else have something to add to this?
I threw into the Zoom chat there, just Hystrix is kind of famous for, blazing trails on that from Netflix.
Let me see what you share in the chat. Netflix. Oh yeah, what was this? Hysterics. Hysterics is a latency and fault tolerance library designed to isolate point system service third-party library stop cascading. Okay, cool.
Yeah, except this is only a Java library.
Okay.
Oh yeah, to be fair, I wouldn't say that you should use this, but the thought around it, and if you read articles on it, you'll get a lot of good inspiration. Sorry.
Agreed. Yeah.
I also was introduced to a startup called Supertenant, which is doing something similar with an SDK that integrates with a lot of the mainstream languages and implements the ability to throttle individual tenants, however you define a tenant within your application. So if your outages can be caused because one of your tenants is abusing your database for some reason, happens to be doing an import, and now you have the noisy neighbor problem and it affects everyone else, not an uncommon scenario, you can now at a per resource level using Supertenant restrict or throttle those requests. And then it also has the ability to help your application fail gracefully. And it also adds in features like being able to understand the cost to service your requests for individual tenants, however you define a tenant. So I thought it was a pretty cool concept for a startup. They're very early stages. Don't know yet anyone. We don't have any customer using them or anything, but worth checking it.
Thanks, that's very helpful. Thanks everyone for the ideas and tips. I'll take a look at the linked documents as well.
There's also the Amazon's Builders Library article that covers this. I linked to it in the Zoom chat thingy.
Zoom chat, fabulous. Oh, this one here. Implementing health checks.
And they discuss all the trade-offs and stuff. It's a pretty good one.
Cool.
I cannot really answer the question because it depends. Like, how are you handling a partial failure in your application? Like the example, okay, the database is down, fine. Maybe there's not much you can do, but what if Redis is down? What do? Do you stop serving requests? Do you serve critical requests only? Do you serve requests without using a cache and just take the increased load time? Like it's very, very application dependent.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, that's fair.
And also there are not only the Kubernetes checks, but also ALB checks and Route 53 health checks and a bunch of other things you can do.
I'll throw it out there that I did work on an application that had this a lot because it was an IoT platform. So we had certain organizations that would absolutely flood the platform when they connected new buildings, and through various means, they would sometimes just not turn all of the devices on until they decided that the warehouse or hotel or whatever other place was ready. And then we would just see hundreds of devices logging metrics every second, because we had a by second set of logic. And we had gone through and picked out a platform that helped with that, now defunct, so not really worth I think mentioning, but you know, they had one of the biggest things that we noticed out of all of it was testing it, and having performance testing around it is really helpful, and simulating those events for the sake of making sure that your code changes aren't causing regressions on performance related issues is critical. So I would, you know, I think I've said it before on this, on these sessions, but please performance test. And if you don't have any, it's not too much effort to at least get something started.
I wanna add another thing here. Don't try to handle DDoSes and capacity constraints in your Kubernetes or in your app. Like, it's already gonna be dead, and you're gonna have to wait, I don't know, 2 minutes for stuff to scale up and then to scale up again, and everything's gonna be overloaded. Like, you can do it, but it's gonna be horrible and expensive as heck. Offload that to, you know, the cloud provider that has millions of instances that can handle that without a hitch. So handle that at WAF level or at the ALB level. A lot of SASes do straight, for example, target group per client. And if a client gets too intense, that they can play with that, or other things like that. There are things that you as an individual customer cannot handle, but that AWS, as the behemoth that is, can very easily handle.
Good advice.
Yeah, to that point, I can say I used to work for a company that we were an ISP in Phoenix, and one of our customers, it was a data center, and we basically were like reselling bandwidth to customers in the data center, and we had a customer who did something and became the target of a DDoS attack from China, and just the scale of that attack was so big that it flooded the entire backhaul, like the entire backbone of the Phoenix to LA market, on like 3 carriers, on like level 3 Quest and someone else. Their entire backhaul between Phoenix and LA was shut down, and the only way to deal with that was basically getting those carriers involved so that they could throttle it, like at their pairing points with ChinaNet, you know, as an example. So there are lots of scenarios like that. Exactly, Vlad, what you said is that there are lots of problems that are too big for any one individual company to figure out how to handle on their own.
Yeah, it made me think of that. I guess this goes back to 2015. There were some things they were branding like the Great Cannon. I think they were leveraging the firewall itself to install pixels or something in the requests that just sent insane amounts of traffic from random IPs. All right.
This one was, the one I was involved in was just like a giant botnet of like tens of thousands of computers that were infected with something, and they just targeted at this one company that we happened to be hosting in our data center. So we were the, you know, one level removed problem, but it cascaded all the way back through LA and needed to get carriers involved to help. And FBI cyber crimes and a bunch of other people got involved, which it was very interesting. But it was not a fun problem, but it was an interesting learning experience.
Any other questions we can get to today?
On the note of WAF, I know AWS offers their own WAF solution. GCP offers like Armor or something equivalent to AWS WAF. And then I think Azure has their own Azure WAF. And then obviously there's Cloudflare. Are there any other solutions that are agnostic, like cloud agnostic, like Cloudflare that you folks have used? Or is Cloudflare or one of the native solutions what everyone's using these days? It's kind of open to anyone who may have deployed something.
I mean, there are a lot of there are independent providers of DDoS mitigation. I don't remember what there was one called Black something. I forget what it was called, but that do it. I think Cloudflare being the more recognized one.
I mean, I think there are definitely others like there's Akamai has a WAF solution. Fortinet actually makes like really good appliance-based WAF solutions if you're hosting your own infrastructure, and I believe they even have virtual appliances you can run on top of AWS if you want to do that. There's a couple others out there. What's that other one that's like for the small and business, the small Barracuda Systems makes like a bunch of WAFs out there as well that usually are deployed as an appliance device. It's usually like a 1U rack unit that you throw in, but
Yep.
A lot of these now have virtual versions of them that can be run on any cloud provider.
I've been looking at AWS WAF recently, but one limitation I found is because I'm using an NLB, that it can't just throw a WAF in front of the NLB. I'm not sure if anyone here has solved that before. Behind the NLB, I've got Nginx running, and I do all of my host-based routing with Nginx at this time. But I can't seem to find a way to introduce a WAF other than
Why do you have Nginx, by the way? Why are you?
We're using Nginx Ingress, the controller from Kubernetes. So that was a decision we made. There's obviously a number of other Ingress controllers we could use, but
we decided on load balancer controller, and then you get WAF.
Yeah, I figure that's what the answer is going to be. Yeah, we might just have to do that at this point. Cool, thanks.
Or you can get really hacky and do what I had to do for one customer. It was for something we were doing with API Gateway, but you can actually just introduce an ALB in front of your other controllers and just route all traffic to your Nginx controller basically at that point. But you then get the ability to attach the WAF there, even though that the ALB is basically useless for anything except for that specific reason. But you can do that as well. So you go NLB, ALB, then Nginx, which is kind of dumb, but it works.
Did you need to get ALB in front of the NLB? Like WAF, ALB, NLB, Nginx? Or do you have to do the ALB?
No, the other way, you basically throw the ALB in behind the NLB and then in front of your Nginx controller.
Okay, cool. That's a really good idea. I'll check that out. Thank you.
Sorry, could you repeat the ordering again? What is in front of what?
NLB, ALB, Nginx controller.
But the Nginx controller has its own load balancer, which would be
it does.
ALB Classic or an NLB.
Yeah, exactly. Then whatever it's spinning up is basically going to be another ALB, another load balancer in there. You're going to have 3 load balancers in line, which is kind of dumb.
I see. So you can have
work.
2 NLBs and 1 ALB.
Mm-hmm.
ALB in the
Basically.
middle in this case.
Yes.
correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, exactly.
Couldn't you just have the ALB at the very front?
Yeah, you can just have the ALB to the NLB.
It depends what protocols you're using and why you're using the NLB.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, just layer 7.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a good reason for the NLB, to be honest. So
Well, it could be to end-to-end TLS. So you're using reasons to still use Nginx Ingress today in AWS EKS is because you want to have pod level encryption, transit encryption. So you would not get that because it would get big. Yeah. Well, I guess
You
you
get
would.
decrypted. Well,
Yeah.
it'll get re-encrypted at the ALB, basically. It'll get decrypted and then re-encrypted by the ALB when you do that. Yeah, so none of this is like a great solution, but yeah, usually NLVs are only out there for when you basically need like a cut through proxy that is non-HTTP based. So you're running some sort of protocol that needs to be sent like at you know, to your pods that is not an HTTP based protocol, like some sort of like gRPC or something like that you want to run through there. So see if you really need NLB. That would be the easiest thing, and then you can just turn that off, and then you use ALB all the way through.
Yeah. Cool. Appreciate the info on that. Thank you.
Alex, you were saying that there's an annotation. I didn't think there was a way to do it with an annotation in Ingress Nginx.
Yeah, the more I'm thinking about it, you may not be able to, but in EKS, like you have the same annotations on a service when you make it a load balancer type, which is all Nginx Ingress is doing, that you have almost all the same annotations as you do with the AWS load balancer controller, because in the background, it's just using the same thing and same APIs to do it. So I just realized I thought I had done this, but I hadn't. But it might be something worth testing. You might be able to just make the Nginx Ingress service, the load balancer service, an object in Kubernetes. You might just be able to add the correct annotations to turn that into an ALB and attach the WAF there and skip a whole bunch of hops. Again, with the caveat that now you're at layer 7, not layer 3, or sorry, layer 4. So it's only going to work for HTTP stuff. If you're using like gRPC or like other protocols that don't run on top of HTTP, that wouldn't work for you.
Yeah.
And well, the WAF's not going to work for you anyways, like the AWS WAF, because it only works on ALBs anyhow.
Huh. If I'm just skimming this, but if this looks like what I think it does, you deploy the ALB controller and the Ingress Nginx controller, and then you can have the ALB controller handle the WAF part and pass it off to the Ingress Nginx controller. So it's a pure native Kubernetes solution. And I know, I think that's what you're building. So maybe it's an interesting approach.
Yeah, that was actually what I was suggesting there. So you stand them both up, like, and they piggyback back and forth like that, or back to back like that. But then you do end up, if you're not using shared ALBs, you end up with 2 ALBs basically for every single service, and you know it becomes costly to do it that way too, and a bunch of other things. So
unless you're able to use Ingress, like ALBs can be grouped. So unless you're able to actually make logical groupings, but then like those groupings, they share the same WAF rules.
Exactly.
Is that a problem?
Yeah.
Right.
It gets complicated, and it's, you know, I don't know. It's not my most favorite suggestion. Technically, we could make it work, but should is a better question.
All right, everyone, we are out of time for today. I just want to remind you, we'll be posting a recording of a session to our YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/cloudposse to get those recordings. If you haven't yet signed up or registered for office hours, we host these calls weekly. They're free to join for anyone. Go to cloudposse.com/office hours to register. Again, cloudposse.com/office hours. We syndicate some of the most interesting links from our office hours and from our Slack community on a weekly newsletter. Go to newsletter.cloudposse.com to get those, and join our Slack community at slack.cloudposse.com. Again, slack.cloudposse.com. We all participate in an office hours channel there. We also have lots of other topical channels on AWS, Terraform, Kubernetes, etc., that are a great place to ask questions. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Go to linkedin.com/in/Osterman. Again, linkedin.com/Osterman to connect with me. And lastly, if you are interested to learn more about Cloud Posse and how we can move the needle for you and your organization with Terraform on AWS, go to cloudposse.com/quiz. Again, cloudposse.com/quiz. Thanks all for your time. Talk to you soon.